Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Yvonne Farrell, and I'm absolutely delighted to be sitting here with these architects, Taillieu and Lacaton and Jean-Philippe Vassal. These are architects that Shelley McNamara and I greatly admire, and I've had the fantastic pleasure this morning to spend the time doing nothing else but sitting in their space and in their space, just giving it the time that it actually needs. And I would recommend people, I suppose the power of the Biennale, of any Biennale, is the wonderful selection that is put out in front of you. But what is also important is to, like the slow food movement, that you spend time in certain places. And it was my great privilege and honor to spend time listening to the film of yours and sitting in the spaces and watching people smell the timber that encloses your exhibition, and also in Lacaton Vassal's incredible space and reading the books, and they've made a book especially for this Biennale. And I'm aware that there are many students in the room, and in fact we're all students of architecture, no matter what age you are. And I found the book, the Free Space book, which is on the tables, where there's the blue and white definition of free space and non-free space, incredibly informative and incredibly clear. So it's very nice to spend time sitting and reading the book, and their claim of free space between a percentage of 22%, let's say, and then up to 54%. It's just interesting as a measure of the generosity of these architects on this podium with me. The other thing is that the film, I think the reality of both of these groups of architects working in their field is the human life that goes with them. And I am struck by their humanity and their thoughtfulness. So the structure of this afternoon is that we have asked them to make a presentation of about 10 minutes each, and Lacaton Vassal will begin, and then Jo will. And then we will have a discussion both here and hopefully some questions from yourselves. So it's my great pleasure to present these, what we believe, are fantastic and meaningful architects. Thank you.
First, it's a great pleasure to have been invited here in Venice for the Biennale and to talk about this question of free space. And when we work, we design space, we don't necessarily think about that. And here there was an occasion to think what can be free space in each of our projects. And space for opportunity. Space for opportunity allows clearly to give more. What is important also, and what we believe, it is that opportunities of space allow to do more with less. It's why we always want to work with what exists. Opportunities happen from the existing situations. We call them situations urbaines capables. It means capable urban situations, situations that have capacities. They represent the new materials, and they exist in all situations. New materials for construction and new materials for architecture. They exist precisely in the richness of the existing, but perhaps they exist even more in the weakness of the existing, or to repair, or to change, or to transform intelligently. And they exist inside this so exciting complexity of the city. So working precisely with what exists, precisely, carefully, with kindness, with generosity, allows to find the conditions of economy that will give the possibility to push the ambitions much further away. Here in close to the Atlantic coast, already was done nearly, because situation was fantastic. So the question, it was to say perhaps 90% of all what we need were already there. So we just had to add 10% more, some steel, some concrete, some glass, and then the situation become possible to inhabit inside. So just adding what is necessary to one situation to build and create another one. Or here in this place in Dunkirk, in north of France, this abandoned space was huge, 80 meters long and 30 meters high, 30 meters wide. And this place was abandoned, and the brief was to fill it with a new contemporary art situations, making 4 or 5 levels inside this building. That was the only one after the demolition of the harbor activity. And it was strange for us, nearly crazy for us, to think that we had to fill this void. So we proposed to add, to double the space, instead to make the program inside the existing building, to make exactly this program in this brother building. And by the way, by making the program outside in a much more economic way, to keep the existing situations for life, for free space. Or in Paris, in these situations of the Museum of Contemporary Art, this part of the building was totally abandoned during 2 or 3 years, waiting for a prestigious program to come inside in order to adapt the building to a program. And finally, nothing went. And when, with a very small budget, there was a possibility to install a center of art inside, just making the installation. It was possible just to live in the building, to live this life and the visitors and the artists coming again, just to make it livable again. So sometimes economy, low budget are much better than very, very high budgets. Or here, in these slabs, in these buildings, totally full with families, built in the 60s. And after this kind of attempt of transformation in the 80s by making some colors, brown or yellow on the facade to try to improve the life of the inhabitants. And when 30 years later, now, it seems that the solution was to demolish it. We think that it was a bad idea, and we think that it was much better to try to improve, to extend. When we have one, and when we demolish, we lose one. And then we need to rebuild one. So at the end, we have one. And when you transform, you have one and you add 0.5, and at the end, you have 1.5. You have more than when you demolish and you spend 2 or 3 times less money. So it is to find these situations, these opportunities of the city in order to push the ambitions much far away. Where here in Saint-Nazaire, for densification, it was necessary to find 80 flats instead of 40 existing flats. It was not necessary to demolish what was exist. First, to improve the quality of the 40 existing flats, but then to add 40 new ones. Working with the situations offers a lot of additional possibilities and economic facilities. Thousands of these situations exist in all cities, thousands and thousands. It is just necessary for architects to go very precisely in all these cities and to look precisely at these situations, to find them with the curiosity, with the research, and to try to improve them. Not waiting for a master plan. We think that the new urbanism is something that is linked to this reality and to this approach. Architecture must create freedom and no constraints. Must offer to the users the possibility of moving, of appropriating space, and situations of interpretation. Generous space invites the user to foster relations, appropriate space, and invent uses, adding capacity for a maximum of freedom of use, multiplying the ground to invent spaces, expanding spaces, creating extra space, free of function to multiple uses, building as much free space as programmed space with the same budget. So it means a dwelling should have the same capacity of a villa. In order to create more fluidity, more mobility, to go out from the windows, to go on a winter garden, on a balcony, turning around your flat. It means that we can find very simple structural systems. Instead of walls, we can find some ossature frames of columns and beams and floors, producing floor in an economic way in order to create more possibilities. Instead of fighting against climate, it's better to play with the climate, to see how you can appropriate the climate. And instead of thickness of foam, it is probably better to work on intermediate climatic zones that will allow people to have multiple uses inside. Inhabiting, beyond the functional, freedom, comfort, generosity of space, pleasure, and luxury for all. Instead of a very standard house, to make a double house. The first house, Latapi house. Here, clearly, the double space is all the winter garden. The same dimension as the inhabitable space. And what it is strange, it is to see when you discuss with the owners that finally they use this space that is non-heated space most of the time. So in fact, you live more long time in the space that has not fulfilled the regulations than in the space that it is normally adaptable for inhabitation. In this space in Mulhouse for Cité Manifeste, it is just about the superpositions of two efficient systems. One is for structure, making floors in a very efficient way. The second one, in superposition, is just making a system that will control the climate. And in this production of floors and controlling the climate, we create the conditions of living. Here, the space, the free space, is the space of the winter garden. But also it is in the depths of the ground floor, 20 meters deep. So it means at one moment you create a sort of intermediate space in the middle of the flat that will improve and add to the possibilities of use. And immediately it is interesting to see how life takes place in these spaces. Transformation instead of demolition. When precisely the buildings are like that, and when it seems that nothing is no more possible, it is still possible to go inside because we consider the buildings from outside, and we have to consider the building inside. People during 50 years, day by day, adding to the decoration of their flats. The richness is inside. So it is just to how we can improve the situations, how we can help the situations. What is missing? It is like that. Very small windows when the view is fantastic. So open the windows at each level and give the possibility to extend. Transformation instead of demolition. 3 or 4 times less money to create an apartment that will be 50% bigger than the standard of today. The free space here, it is this new winter garden, 4 meters deep, that is added to the existing, and suddenly that makes that each flat becomes a new villa. People inside, staying inside during the construction. And then new life, new possibilities, gardening, new furniture, new occupation of space. And the facade changed, by the way, as a consequence. A school of architecture, unprogrammed space to invent uses. In Nantes, we were lucky to have the school in the middle of the city, precisely in the middle of the city, close to the river. So what is a school of architecture? It is also a space of freedom, a space for invention, a space where every inhabitant of the city should be able to come inside and see what the students and what the professors are doing, to see what the research is searching about. School of Architecture is a platform. It is the biggest office of each city. It has to be open. So we imagine it as a sort of huge platform, creating some floors at 9 meters, 16 meters, and 24 meters, each one at 1 ton by square meters of capacity, that will create the possibility for the School of Architecture to take place inside, but also to invent plenty of other situations of invitation. So a sort of giant superstructure. Free space is there. When the brief was asking for 15,000 square meters, in fact, we have proposed 30,000 square meters, double space of terraces, of intermediate climatic spaces. So from this situation, the School of Architecture came and created some mezzanine, some intermediate floors, with the ramp coming from the ground to the first level, the second level, and then the roof. That creates possibilities, many possibilities, very quickly. In the former school in Nantes, there was 3 associations of students. Actually, in this school, we have 17 associations of students working, searching for many questions, plants, furniture, design, dance, music. They occupy the space. The space and the quantity of space is responsible of these spaces. Diversity of space also. Some students, they use under the ramp, where you have hardly 1 meter high possibilities, you have an association there. Installing, playing music, installing nets, just being alone, looking at the river, climbing on the ramp. Empty spaces that can be full occupied. Dances, events, dinners, working, events, playing badminton, taking the sun, meetings outside. Climbing to the roof, or running to the roof, finding the free roof open for events, for music, for objects, for cinema. Space offers these questions. It is a power of space.
the format that we will use is that we'll have our next speaker and then we'll begin questions, I think, if that's okay. Thanks, Joe.
First of all, okay, yeah, that's the next one. First of all, we are very happy to be invited by Yvonne and Shelley in this Biennale, and now again here to speak about our work. Thank you. I will start at first to speak about space for opportunity by, on one hand, the project that we presented here at the Biennale, on the other hand, to bring it in relation with 3 other projects we are doing. The project we presented here in the main building at the Giardini is the Project Caritas. Project Caritas, this is the exhibition, how it is today, how you see it today. We created spaces. We created different spaces together with the pictures of Philippe Dujardin, a photographer and artist. We created spaces to feel the project like you will be part of the project. And I will explain later about the setting of the way we created the walls. But I want just to point you to the material of the walls we created, and luckily how this perfectly for us fits together with the ceiling of the existing building. Look to the beams in the existing building. So it's like that. We brought also the furniture of the existing building into here, into the exhibition itself. Nowadays they have a little bit furniture. So the scale of the pictures is that you start to be really feel yourself in between this project. On one hand, a kind of series of spaces, sometimes a picture standing beside on the wall. Some more pictures to explain, but in fact I want to speak about the project itself. This is the project, how we started with it, how the brief of the competition came to us. It was a small competition between 3 architects, us and 2 other offices, NOAA and the office of Henk de Smet and Paul Vermeulen. The brief, it came to a kind of competition because there was a new young director, this kind of ages as we are, and he was thinking about, they really wanted to demolish this building, and he thought, that must be a pity. The reason it was not completely demolished because they found asbestos in the building. That means that they had to remove first the asbestos before continuing with the demolishing. The director of the psychiatric clinic found also in between his doctors and psychiatrists a kind of let's say relation with them to do something more than demolishing this project. So the competition started. The building is maybe just to bring it in relation. The fantastic thing is that this complete setting is in fact a setting of 15 buildings. 15 buildings between the two built between the 2 world wars, where they had really for different treatments different buildings. But of course, nowadays the regulations are changing, the treatments are changing, and also the use is more not to big sleeping rooms, but more to let's say individual rooms. So this was the starting point. They yet started to demolish buildings. Look on the left, it's so strange how new buildings had to have probably an orientation of 45 degrees. So piece by piece they started to demolish. The highlighted one is in fact our building. The brief was, architects think about it, do something about it. In fact, look, only the red ones were the existing one in the build. The nice thing is they were built in the same typology also, and it felt really with the open space between it, a kind of other typology of clinic, because it's a clinic who can take, let's say, a long time that you will be there, and the green in between the buildings was really an interesting thing. All the not red colored buildings are yet replaced. So our building is behind the dark gray one on the right hand. So this was what we presented in the competition. A quite big model. At first, if you look at it, you could almost say there is nothing changed. We in fact wanted to keep the building approximately what it was, and adding only things where we could add opportunities to the building. And in some cases also look at the right hand, how the opening in the facade was. I will show you later on how we were dealing with construction elements like that as well. And in an open space there are growing plants. We made in fact a kind of public square. The building now is not anymore a building, it's rather let's say an open place, an open square with enclosed spaces, and sometimes with elements, namely greenhouses, where you can be to do specific sessions, specific conversations, specific activities. So we also kept away the roof what was gone, and these were pictures of the models we were presenting. Facade was not removable, only in the model. And the roof stays open, but we created those places. Some model pictures. We were also explaining the projects by those sketches to explain the possibilities of the space, to explain how you, let's say, could use the place, how you could have this kind of let's say, room without a roof, but also have those plants, the greenhouses. And this is in fact the project as it is today. You see what I wanted to say about the opening on the right hand. Almost no changing, and then the funny thing about the whole project is that we almost needed only 100,000 euros extra not to demolish the project. The subsidies for demolishing were bigger than to do something with it. So we kept the building. With adding only 100,000 euro, we could do this complete project, although it costed more than 100,000 euro to do it. But with all regulations, it was more worthwhile to demolish it. And so these are the spaces inside. So it's a combination inside-outside space. It's a square, so it's completely open every day, day and night. And as I explained, we are architects, and we also wanted to do something. I mean, we did specific kind of, not restorations, but a doctor called it kind of healings, a kind of healings towards the building, what are still visual, just like in normal day life, you are hurted and you have a wound, and then afterwards it's still visible, although it's healed, let's say. And this is what we also did with this building, not a kind of cosmetic treatment to do, just like there was happening nothing. Now we expressed what we did, and we did it also on the kind of, let's say, logic way for us. And these are those inner spaces, because some days you had to do things on different levels. Also outside space need light. We introduced also the elements of a real outside space into the building itself. The cellar started to be also a specific place. Trees were growing in the building. And there we heard that also the chimney is used very often by the young people in the evenings. They use it to come together to sit there. I will make the link with the planks. So what we thought, of course, this project is not finished. This project will continue in the sense that we will learn about the possibilities. Also, we had to do things. Just one thing is the floor. I come immediately back to that point, and at some cases it was too dangerous to go up, and then we built a wall. So some floors, of course, in the building were not meant to stay outside. So we spoke with the client and say we had the opportunity to go to Venice. We will present over there the project. We know that we have to replace some planks in the floor. Is it not now? It will be within a certain time. So can we make a kind of a deal? So all the planks that we use here will be used in the building to replace pieces where it is necessary. It's just like the concrete blocks were solving the kind of structural elements, those planks of the Biennale will be used in the next step of the building. I will bring it in relation with this kind of thought in relation with the project in Charleroi. Charleroi is a place in Belgium where they wanted to stimulate. There was in the past a lot of heavy metal industry, but almost all of it stopped. There was this exhibition hall. It was a competition, and the budget was, in fact, if you calculate it, to, let's say, restore or to bring it in a good condition, you had the money for the half of the building. So we said, let's do something else. In fact, what we did is making with the building, keeping the left and the right ring of the exhibition halls like they are, because it's for exhibition. You don't have to bring it to another climate. We made in the middle zone a kind of outside connection, but because there is a quite a heavy height difference from the upper city and the lower city. So we made, in fact, a kind of connection who is also the, let's say, the entrance zone of the buildings itself. A kind of public thing who also brings the people of the city in relation with the expo and in relation with the upper and the lower city. Instead, so focusing the budget where you really can do something instead of spreading out the budget and only do, let's say, kind of cosmetic things who are really not helping the function. This is the project like it is. It's at the moment we are almost within a few months starts to construct it. It's a garden, it's a circulation, and it's even not more than that. The expo halls itself were good for the function it is. Cotton, the project Cotton, is in fact, this was the drawing we were making, and this drawing explains what we did. It's an old military base in the city center of Ghent. Very strange to have this kind of eclectic buildings in the city center of Ghent and used as a military base. Just like nowadays, it's not anymore so necessary. There were at the end almost nobody anymore, and all the buildings were standing free. They wanted to bring the administration, the provincial administration, into this building instead of really attacking all the buildings itself, because they wanted to have all buildings really connected in function. We designed a circulation on the first floor. And the pavement in between the buildings, in the middle of the buildings, we made a big park of it. The ground floor connection was an outside connection. And these were the drawings. We like to make hand drawings. We only for this competition were handling in hand drawings to explain what we were doing. On the ground floor, the open floor, this kind of green space in the middle of the city. And the last project I want to introduce is a project Padden. Padden is in a really very small place, let's say 20 kilometers outside of Brussels, a kind old farm, a farmstead. With buildings, not all of them in good condition, especially in Belgium, those kind of buildings. The first buildings are in good condition, the next one is built a little bit less good, and the last ones were really mostly built terribly. So the function for it is a kind of nature educative center. A very, very small budget, so some sketches of the design table. What we did is in fact making a between space to keep the buildings, because at first they wanted to demolish everything. We thought there is also on the right hand top a place where they make bread. Schools are coming over there to do different activities related with the nature around it, but also activities of let's say making bread, introductions, starting there to make walks in the nature around it. So we in fact placed one big volume over it, so we could keep the most of the buildings inside it, and especially it's even a double thing. Then we could provide a lot more space non-climatized as well, especially very good for this kind of program. You come in there, it's winter time, you have your jacket on, and there is an introduction of a walk, so you don't have to take out your jacket. So that means with the little budget we had, we could give a lot more flexible space. For example, also the first floor is non-heated space, but these has limits. They know about it. But on the other hand, they have possibilities as well, and that's what we were looking for. This is the new entrance, let's say. We kept the buildings like they are, so some of them will be inside insulated, but it's very simple to insulate them because they are, you don't have to protect them anymore from water. And it's the main goal is making this in-between space, this flexible space when there are weekends with organized things that you really can benefit of this double space. It's an in-between climate, an in-between condition. It's very linked to the project we just saw, the school. I cannot show yet those pictures of activities. We are also now starting with the construction. And the oven is then still part of it, and especially in this context, the let's say the characteristics of these buildings give possibilities to do different activities instead of a new building, and also the kind of the amount of square meters is that much more that we could give. This will be the new side facade. So space for opportunity or let's say opportunities created by space.
Thank you, Joe. I'll start with a question for you, Joe, just as you finished, if I may. Your work seems to spring from some other world, perhaps a surreal world, or a world of play, of dreams? Or is it a world of pragmatics, of construction, of making? What has influenced or inspired you and your colleagues to engage on this particular path?
It's in fact the world of both. On one hand, we think sometimes we are incredible pragmatic, but this incredible pragmatics leads to a kind of joy. In the sense, we believe it's a matter of keeping possibilities open on the design table. We don't have a kind of let's say, not a kind of views of what it has to be, and some outcome of this pragmatism leads to a kind of freedom in translation. And this freedom in translation is of course related with a kind of enjoyment of doing the things. Of course, let's say the moment you have to restore the bricks, you take another brick, don't place it in the same line because you never succeed. It's the contractor asks, yeah, well, what position do you have to think? Then indeed you start to feel yourself completely disconnected and make a kind of flexible thing, and the result, because it's probably maybe not common as a kind of result, although it comes for us from a kind of pragmatism, a kind of logicness in thought. We don't do those things as a kind of visual action, although we are not afraid to take a visual decision in those things. But I think it's a complete different world, making a kind of visual action or keeping the openness in the visual result.
Thank you. May I ask Lacaton Vassal? Your work has influenced, challenged, and inspired architects throughout the world. Your approach to architecture is radical, not mainstream, where you challenge accepted values and norms. Could you describe your key philosophy? But most of all, I suppose, could you describe where it comes from?
What you ask for is a life. It's a life of making projects or working. It's true that it probably comes from our education, our background, that we never accept a program, a situation as it is just given or requested, and we like to go through, to go behind, to see something else, to see our own view of things, our own reality. And it's also a way to open the question, which is most of the time a program, a brief is very narrow, because it seems to be the result of a very long process of discussions, negotiations, and we like to try to be new in this situation, and to forget, to try to not to forget, because we don't know it, but we don't want to know a lot, and just to start with new eyes, and to be as much as possible as opened. And this comes from probably a very long time, from our childhood, from our studies at School of Architecture, which was just after '68 in France. We were very, very open, very optimistic. Probably also we don't have the same background, but we have joined them. Jean-Philippe was born and educated in Morocco. Then he was working and living in Africa, and I was also going there. So all this world learned to us that finally the most important that we have to do is to be free of thinking, to be free of understanding things, and to propose free response. Even if sometimes it's to take risk, but for us this word of probably the key words could be freedom, generosity, kindness, economy. And it's not the opposite of being pragmatic, rigorous. Generosity is not the opposite of economy. And architecture is also this addition of contraries, and it's very important to work with those contraries. Poetry is not the opposite of rigor. Construction is not the opposite of freedom of use. So it's very important for us to keep always this situation of being new somewhere, being new in a situation. We like to start projects as new as possible, as in a way as lost as possible, in order that every time we can be in a new state. To start and to try to forget for a while our experience, and afterwards, of course, we need it for something else. But for us, it's probably what is important to, and also to know that we are not doing architecture for ourselves, but architecture for someone, for people, for uses, for pleasure, and whatever the conditions are. Everyone should be able to live in architecture, to live in good conditions, and it's not at all a question, an issue of cost, of economy. We have the skills to make all situations good to live, and that's probably how we see our work. So today it's one of the most important challenges for the architects, is to do this architecture, whatever the conditions are, to provide good conditions of living. And what you have shown, and what also we have presented, is also the idea that working with the existing, working what we have, is probably the chance today of making a new architecture, a new urban planning, working with economy, and doing the best for everyone. You want to add something?
No, I think perhaps just to add, we want to be curious of everything we still have to look at, to listen at, in every city we go, in every place we go, in every situation. It's about being curious and learning, listening. And then, for example, sometimes it is just thinking about places of happiness, spaces where you see people happy. It's because they are looking to the sea, or they are on a bench and they are with their girlfriend, or what is a space of happiness? And how, as architect, we can understand from these spaces and try to, because I have seen that in Thailand, or I have seen that in Venice, or I can say, but how was the space? What can I do with this memory of space? And how I can include it, transform it, adapt it to other situations, even if I am in Berlin or if I am in other space. So this curiosity, it's one quality that all architects have. It is to be in the reality, to talk with real people, to see real situations, not to stay all the time in the office, but to have this proximity to the reality. And we want to work with that.
I believe there is a very interesting thing in that sense, that we also really want to present a kind of optimism in things. We never think we had to solve things. We have to rather create possibilities. I think that's an interesting engagement to have, because you, especially when you work with existing buildings in a context, then you are so granted to, then you have yet so many things for free. And you have to catch the possibilities rather than solving the conditions. And I think this is really an important attitude. I think we share this attitude very much. And I believe that then there is the result must be also creating possibilities and having a kind of opportunities. And if you solve things, you never have the feeling you succeed in solving, but because there must be always things that you can not solve. Just like we like to be really, we also believe in to go to the construction site itself, because a lot of things helps to change even till the latest moment. I always believe that the project, it's never too late till the moment it isn't built. A lot of things are changing to go to the building sites to see again possibilities and to say, one moment, stop, and now we can do that and that and that. Things you had maybe to see before but haven't seen for certain reasons. And I also believe that this kind of craftsmanship, this kind of being part, it's not making a kind of concept that you just project. It's a architecture for people.
Can I say what I find interesting about listening to Joe is that the pressures on the contracts on site make what you say very, very difficult now. That if you make changes, you have in our country, we have what is called quantity surveyors, who are people who measure the actual quantity of what you have designed, and it's written into the contract. And if you change, there's an order, there's a change, there's money, and it's just interesting when we talk here today about freedom of opportunity. We could also discuss. We won't do it this afternoon, but there is a huge pressure on the architectural industry to have it designed in the abstract in our offices so that when you go on site that you don't make changes. And some time ago, we had this very interesting discussion about the impact of the world wars, the First and Second World Wars, say, in Europe, that huge numbers of craftspeople were annihilated, as well as on the sadness of their lives passing, is that huge amounts of that knowledge was lost, and that then the architectural industry becomes an industry, and there's prefabrication, and it's a different speed. So the effect, the human effect, has affected our industry. But what I find really thought-provoking sitting here with these architects is words like you said, Jean-Philippe, excuse me, that I think you called the School of Architecture in Nantes, or Schools of Architecture, as the biggest office in a city. There's something very interesting about that the Biennale itself is an opportunity for schools of architecture to think about architecture over 6 months. The professors and teachers and ourselves as teachers and practicing architects, that schools of architecture, when you describe them as the biggest office in the city, is actually quite a radical thought. And maybe people, what I find about on my left and my right, you're actually very radical thinkers, because you don't, we talked earlier on today, we were saying sometimes there are images of apartments which look more like foyers of banking halls than where people live. Because the ad is, you know, live the dream, and you have this kind of place in which you as a person are pushed into a kind of an aesthetic, and if you don't have things tidy, you know what I mean, you're not in the architectural world. Whereas when I look at the work of these architects on my left and right, and when I look at the films of your work and how, when you talk about happiness, people live in the places that you design and make. And it liberates people to maybe take up and enjoy ironing in the planted areas that you, the 4 meter extra. You make life more enjoyable because of the kind of architects you are. But you're not trying to stuff people into an aesthetic of minimalism. And one thing that came up in the film about Caritas, where I think it was a psychiatrist, made the point that in modern architecture, because we don't have the attic and we don't have the cellar, that you also throw away memory. And maybe we could talk for a minute about the kind of imposition of contemporary architecture on people's lives. And I think that I'm surrounded by you as architects who, the free space of happiness or liberty, or allowing people to have, you know, 10,000 plants, or, you know, motorbikes on their terrace or whatever. You don't seem to inhibit people. You make an architecture that just encourages people to be who they are.
I think it's so important to believe in the capacity of creativity of inhabitants when they have enough space for doing that. Most of the time, actually, the standard, everything is defined. You have only one place for the bed, one place for the door, one place for the electricity to switch it or less, one place for your lamp, and that's all, and you keep that during 20 years. I think there is no mobility, there is no fluidity in these systems. At the moment, we offer some places where the fluidity can exist, when the movement can exist. You will immediately see the creativity of habitants to invite their neighbors, to start to make painting, to make fantastic gardening, etc., etc. And by the way, they create beauty. They create beauty because at the end, what you see, it is their gardens, or it is their interiors with this painting that they have done. And they create social relations because they have enough space to invite themselves to each other. So it is a power of space, precisely. So to give them this capacity is so important, because we need to believe in them. We need to believe in them. We don't have to make their interiors. We have just to give them the possibility to appropriate their space.
For us, it's very important to advocate this idea of free space, but free space also for, it starts from the individual space. And especially you mentioned the pressure of the contract, the pressure. And it's, we can see today that in the cities, the pressure of the market of construction, of housing, is so that this idea of minimum space comes again on the table, and this market introduces the idea that because of the necessary densification, because of the cost of the land, because of the a number of other criteria, we should all live in very, very small spaces, because we are supposed to have everything around, but it's a totally liberal vision. Most of people, first, they cannot afford any more housing in cities, and second, they cannot afford to have every day, to pay every day the external services. So we really struggle against that idea, and for us it's extremely important that the architects advocate this idea of giving more space for each, because it's the condition for the social life. Compressing people inside dwelling, it's not in favor of good relationship with inside the family, but also with neighbors and with the society. And in all the projects that we have built, and especially in the transformation of housing, we could really see the change afterwards, where the family says, you cannot imagine how relaxed we are now in the family, because we have space. The two children, they are not always one on the other one. We can have a place to do a lot of things together. We can invite the friends of our children, and people, they are more open to talk with a neighbor, to have a social life, and for us it's something extremely important, and we really trust that the architects have a great role in that way, not to be submitted always to the law of the market, which is restricting everything and pushing people out of the cities.
I think I want to point to the fact that I really believe that we are architects. We are not working in a free art condition. So that means that for me, I believe that we have a task in that sense. So I think a project only succeeds at the moment the use is really working. And that's why I liked so much the pictures of the houses. Sometimes you see publications that you could imagine or even not imagine how life could take place in it. But the aim of the architecture is that they're happening something, and at the moment the furniture is overtaking the quality of the architecture. Or the moment furniture is destroying the architecture, there is nothing wrong with the furniture, there is something wrong with the architecture, I believe. So I think that's an important issue as a young as architect, to work with this condition, that you project how to live in it, what is the condition of living in those things, and creating more is indeed in housing project. We see it also often. We did an elderly housing, and the restrictions of the square meters were incredibly. A half square meter more makes almost impossible. So we turned it into giving a corner window instead of, we gave every room a double orientation. By shifting the rooms, it created a complete other corridor, and it created a complete other living room. It was a single room, always with two orientations, because we positioned just the window not on one side but on the corner side, also opposite to the bed. And I think sometimes it's dealing again saying, okay, at that moment, okay, square meters are very limited, yes, but what can we then give more, or not more, but the maximum that we can do? And I think that's important.
Just carrying on at that point, what I find in the ramp, say in Nantes, in your school in Nantes, taking, as you say, the difficulty or the requirement of an architect as opposed to an artist, that you had to deal with, let's say, the fire brigade, fire tender had to get all through the building. But what you do then is you link the river with the roof, and you make the roof the public space. So you take the if you like, the practical conditions of life, but they're transformed by the intelligence of architects, like your window, not in this case, but in that case, it connects two things as opposed to one. And I do think that that's where the kind of space, the freedom of opportunity lies in your intelligences, that you find ways to make what is the problem of the fire brigade into the promenade architecturale from the Loire, is it? Up to the roof, to the stars. And what I loved in the little films is that you see a Volkswagen van serving drinks or meals on your roof because the van can drive up onto that one. And so you kind of, it's like a child's idea of, both firms, I think, have this kind of, I don't mean childish, but childlike capacity to kind of say, wouldn't it be lovely if I could drive a tank up onto a roof of a school of architecture, let's say, or that somebody can sit in a greenhouse. And I was saying to these guests earlier that in both their presentations here in Venice in the Biennale, the greenhouse seems to symbolize the kind of liberation of the future. It's garden, it's growing. Both of the exhibitions of these architects have greenhouses as symbols of hope or something in the future. So maybe you want to talk about it.
Yeah, for me the greenhouse is very important because first it's not to say everything has to be transparent or like a greenhouse. Actually, 99% of the built situation is made of walls, of streets, so okay, we can add some transparency to this situation. And it's but one point for me, it is about, because we are always in front of people, it is not possible, it is not possible, this is not possible, it is not possible. Okay, the ramp, it is a very simple thing to go from one point to another point and to have the dimension for a car to go on top to another one. When we talk about climate, yes, it will be too warm. Okay. We give the example of Granada with the gardens, and you see what they are doing with the water and the freshness and the air. When people say, okay, no, it's not possible, you cannot, the area is floodable. Okay, but the most beautiful city in the world is made in the water. For all examples, when they say, okay, here we cannot control the climate. Okay, I go to this farm and I see the man in the greenhouse cultivating tomatoes or salads, and he explains me exactly the precisions for the salads and to the tomatoes or the flowers to grow there, and I see that it is 10 times more sophisticated than heating for people. So I learn from all of these things. These things, when people say, no, it's not possible, yes, they are possible because they already exist. And we can go in places where we see that they exist, and we can just understand and readapt the systems. So it is very simple things. Nothing is complex. Everyone says that technology is extremely complex, that to have more and more science in that, but I think it's important to come back with very simple way of constructing. Columns, beams, floors, climate, working with existing situations, just working like that.
What is important is to try to transform every constraint in a positive thing. For example, the fire brigade, a ramp you could make a kind of minimum just to allow the firemen to go up. But if you make a ramp of 5 meters, it's not so much more expensive, but you can do a lot of things with that. First of all, it's very easy for everyone, because the tracks in the school, it's something very, it's only sometimes. But every day, a lot of students or visitors, they take the ramp and they walk very slowly from the ground floor to the top floor. The disabled people, they can go at the same time, the same place than everyone, as bikes, so it's very open for everyone. Making a large balcony in a housing project, it solves at the same time all the issues of fire transmission, and it becomes a space for uses. So it's very important that for every constraint, instead of complaining that it's too complicated, to see what can we do with that and transform it into a very positive thing. A winter garden is an intermediate space which is more efficient than mineral insulation, and at the same time it becomes a space for use. So it's very important to have this idea that okay, we have constraint, but I must turn it into a positive aspect.
If you look to houses in Belgium who are going from one generation to the other, in fact, mainly what is happening is that all techniques will change. The techniques, just like plumbing, heating and electricity. That's the main thing, beside, of course, also spatial conditions, but an interesting building can even adapt those spatial things. So with new regulations, there's looking, in our opinion, too often indeed to a technical solution for those things. The moment you work with non-technical, but the moment you incorporate it in the design, those solutions for overheating, for benefiting of the warmth in the winter, all those things, when you do that without techniques, you win so much. You win so much, and there is such a it's often difficult because to convince people of that. For this last project I was showing, I said I will only do this project if we can integrate in our team a technical team who is not thinking about the technical things, but who will interfere in the design of the project to avoid techniques in the project. Otherwise, I don't do this project. And they followed those things, and now we can do those. We can really, with the architecture, make interesting as much as possible without that much techniques. Because those techniques are, in my opinion, the weak points of all of buildings. If you create a fantastic space without that much techniques, then even generations can pass over it.
What I might do now is see if there were some questions from the audience. You're more than welcome to ask our guests. Would people like to ask some questions?
The work is really great, I must say. I really enjoyed your presentations. They both, with the economy, but also the sort of generosity, they take the typology of industrial buildings, which seems to really resonate within all of the projects. And I would say, have you found sort of that sort of magical free space that happens there? Has that inspired you to kind of use that, or has it almost come from the technical side of it? So, you know, the economy of scale and the economy of construction that has led to the almost industrial solutions to create this freedom of space, or have you experienced a lot of kind of freedom happening in these large spaces?
We have tried to understand the efficiency of systems. For example, for the first house in Bordeaux, it was our first project. Immediately we have been to around the city of Bordeaux to say where are the places where people are building efficiently. And they were building for garage, or they were building for supermarkets, or they were building. So our project was not to make a garage or not to make a supermarket, but to use some components used to produce efficiency. So the first point, it is this question of structural skeleton, how to make it efficient and economic by using robust, efficient, economic. Then there is a question of the envelope. The envelope, at this time, we were really interested by the way precisely agricultural or horticultural solutions were much more precise, but also much more economic than the techniques for architecture. So we employ these systems. After that, we know that at the moment where the structure and the envelope was done, we had just a question of partition to divide the house with some bedrooms or bathrooms, and to add some elements like shower, bath tube, kitchen, etc. But it is quite simple. So it is by the way or we want to use the things. So sometimes the things can be totally industrial, but at some moment, like in the cafe in Vienna, if you want to work with very beautiful tiles from Turkey, we work with very beautiful tiles from Turkey. So each component has its own identity and is part of a system. After that, the architecture, it is to mix all the systems together, but trying to find the identification and the character, keeping the character of each of them, precisely. And it is in this, all these elements, components mix all together that we think architecture happens.
I can add that also what is interesting in the industrial construction is that efficiency is taken to use as less material as possible. So what is not the same in the architecture building, because architecture building is not always very efficient in the relation between calculation of the building and the material use. And we are really interested in those buildings where everything is at like a skeleton at the minimum what is necessary for the construction of the building. Because this minimum, of course, it's interesting because we don't use so much material, but also this minimum is interesting because we can create a very huge volume with very low impact of the construction. So it makes the building free of everything, free of facade, free of partition, flexible, possible to change in the lives of the buildings. So it's also for us something very interesting because it's connected with a lightness. And lightness for us is something extremely important in building.
I just want to add one example we did. We had to make a connection between two spaces. So there was in between two buildings an outside space of 4 meters, and the budget was limited. What is mostly an incredible benefit. And we had to think about how to make a connection. And then you think, I need to make a roof, I need to make walls, I need to make a floor. And if you then stop thinking what could be the architectural result, but just thinking from the way connection, what could make a connection? We used a polyester tube hanging between two walls, disconnected from the floor, 1 centimeter thickness, diameter 2 meters. You could walk through it. It's a standard material. The outcome is probably a little strange, but it was placed in a half day. It's a machine product. It's roof, it's wall, it's translucent. It's, of course, not a maximum of insulation because it's 1 centimeter thickness, although in winter time, with a lot of moisture, there is never condensation because of the material specifications. So it's this kind of fascination. What is so? Someone worked on this tube in a lot of technical. In greenhouses, for example, we worked with foils. Those foils were tested years by year to find the limits of the material, the maximum of UV protection, and the fastest way of placing. And how could you do that as an architect? You have to work 20 years on it before you reach the same level of quality. And that's the nice thing in those things.
And perhaps I could add something that is for us very important in economy. Because in fact, in this research of less materials, today the question it is less money also. Because actually the material, it is also the money. It means it is not only steel or concrete, it is also energy, time, and cost of elements. And we have to achieve on these elements. And by understanding the construction, it means that to talk about cost by square meter has absolutely no sense. It is a question of the market today. Everything is about cost by square meters. It is 5,000 euro by square meter in Paris. It's always this system. In fact, it has absolutely no reason in terms of construction. The construction, it is only the addition of some components. So it can be the cost of the square meters of floor. It can be the cost of the length of the handrail, it can be the cost of the shower tube, and it is the addition of all these systems. When you ask to different contractors, the one that makes the carpentry, the one that makes the masonry, the one that makes the facade, they give you the right price, and you make the addition as architect. You don't leave anybody else than you making the addition. And then you see that the economy is totally different than a sort of general cost by square meters. By a general contractor. And this is very important to say, okay, it's to create space, and to create space you use some components. And it is the addition of all the cost of all these components that will make the real cost. And it is not a sort of average cost that it is exists in the different cities.
Would I ask another question? Yes?
First, thank you very much for these nice presentations. I would like to ask, what do you think is the problem with these spaces that somehow become what some people think are no places? If this is just a misunderstanding of this free space, or if there are some spaces in architecture that are inevitable to become these no places?
I believe in no place is a place who don't keep things, don't let things possible happening, who is already, let's say, finished by itself. And I think that's at that moment it starts to be a non-place for me. When it's only made almost for itself and not creating those opportunities. Yeah, that's for me the definition of a non-space. A space who is not longing for an action.
I am teaching in Berlin, and Berlin is really famous because you have a lot of voids in the city, empty spaces or voids. And with the students, we try to see how we can intensify the city but keep the voids. I think it's very important, this idea that the voids are important. It is precisely this space that can be filled and unfilled, and filled again and unfilled again. It is a space of possibilities. And it is very important for the city not to fill all the gaps. It's better to intensify situations. So intensify situations means intensify the buildings, intensify the void, intensify the trees, intensify the forest, and making them much more active and strong. So for that, I think these voids are so important.
Probably what you call a no place is probably a place where no connection are existing. And it's most of the time it could be also spaces of representation, which are the result of a kind of composition. But finally, the uses are not there because the connection or the relation with the surroundings cannot happen. So what we talk about, and also Jo, is about the architecture which is made from inside out, which means that the space is not the result of a kind of vertical line where it's first urban planning, public space, regulation, and the very last process is just making buildings inside this composition. And in this case, the building is most of the time becomes an object. And what we show, all of us, is that we really work in the opposite way. It's why the reuse of the buildings, making with, is something so important, because we start from the interior of the situations, and we redefine the situation, but also doing that, we redefine the relations with the next situation. And in this process of always searching relations, normally should not anymore exist no place.
I'm conscious that it's now after 4, and maybe the President would like to say
No,
a few words.
I have a question myself. In the end, this Biennale deals with a fundamental question: what is welfare today and tomorrow? What is improving welfare by means that affordable means? And space is among the candidates, one of the best candidates for this, provided that it's a low-cost affair. Welfare is not just security, is not just goods, is not just so on and so forth. It's space for, we can go back to what the Romans use, otium. So you have to add to your life some otium, which is time and space for you, be it inside or be it outside. I was rather interested in particularly, I hear that you all like challenges, but there is one challenge that I consider a dramatic one, which is what are we going to do with all those buildings like the one you have worked in, built in the 50s, I mean, at the time of the big push of industrialization and here and there. And all in our cities we have, in Europe, a lot of blocks like that. And the question, certainly one of the questions for the future of our cities is what are we going to do with those buildings? I don't like the word peripheries, but it's because we have no peripheries. We have just urban areas and non-urban areas. But those buildings are in our urban areas. The transformation of those buildings implies, of course, two main problems. One you have been dealing with sufficiently, the problems of regulations. The other problem is the problem of property. Who owns those buildings? Because my question was, I mean, the building you have dealt with was a single property of the local authority, so the decision could be taken at once with no other particular institutional complex procedures. Because I mean, in places where the property is divided, I mean, those kind of intervention would require something specific. I mean, and here we got to a paradox that we have to solve in any case. It's that we need more liberal attitude as far as regulators are concerned, but we, on the other hand, we would possibly we will need more complex regulations in terms of property and in terms of great imagination of what we are going to do with this building as seen as a multiple property, and to intervene by complex sort of contracts, complex sort of procedures. But this is the challenge. I mean, the challenge is that the reorganization of the space in which we live, which might be good for the 50s, might not be good for the 50s overcoming. I mean, the families are changing. I mean, everything is changing. So the rigidity of this building is a drama for our cities in the future. So whatever we can do to bring some elasticity in their use is, of course, of the greatest importance for any mayor who care about the future of his city. But the problem of poverty seems to me equally serious as an obstacle as the problem of regulations, requiring this sort of contradictory, one asking for more liberal government, the other one asking for more interventionism. And this is one of the great dilemmas that, of course, we are always facing when we talk about these problems. Thank you.
I have one friend of us, we work with him, Christophe Hutin. He come back from Vietnam. In Vietnam, you have these slabs have been done also in the 60s. It's only private flats in a quite bad situation. And he has seen that by themselves, people, they have pushed the facade 6 meters further in a collective system. So it means that at one moment, people can be able to do that. In Paris, with Frédéric Drouot, our other colleague working on these questions, we have seen a sort of inventory. We have found 1,600 urban situations of these blocks, where sometimes it is social housing, sometimes it is private residences. And most of them, they need to make some minimum works of adaptation for regulation, etc., that immediately cost quite a lot. And we think that if, in these cases, even for private residency, if there is a possibility to find a densification, perhaps of 5%, perhaps of 10%, sometimes of 20% or 30% of new flats, considering the value of the land and of the square meters there, it will be totally enough for them to improve their own flats. So they can find on their plot the economic possibility to extend the system and to improve the quality of their own flats by finding possibility for the other flats. Very often people say these buildings are very bad built. But in fact, in the cities of the 17th century, 18th century, we have buildings that are even weak than these ones. So all technical problems, they need to be solved. There is absolutely not so much difference between one slab that it is in the suburb of Paris and the same slab that it is in Nice, looking to the sea, except that one has huge balconies and big sliding windows opening to these balconies. So just change, finish the work. We have to finish the work of the 60s because for many reasons it has never been finished, and these buildings have been at the last moment done in a very economical way because people say it's enough to have a window of 1 square meter. But if we finish the work of this period, we can make the most luxurious flats by using what already exists and also trying to keep the people inside. So I think we can find, it's difficult. It's difficult, you are right, but we can find solutions.
The thing is that it should not be considered as a problem. We should have a general solution. It's really an issue which could be studied case by case. Because as Jean-Philippe explained, the economy of the transformation must be found on the place. Compared to the public housing that we worked with in France, where it's public subsidies, of course there is one owner, so it's less difficult to take decisions. But if you have a lot of small owners who have just one flat, normally, because we studied some cases with no possibility to achieve the project, but the idea is going on. In fact, no one is against making works. No one is against improving the buildings. The only problem is how we can afford all this transformation. It's why the most important is not really to create new regulations of construction, because there are already too many, but it's to find more a kind of new business plan that allows on the site to find those incomes to pay the transformation. And it's why it's so important to work case by case, because the situation is not twice the same. But we are really confident that in such situation it's possible to find the solution.
I will add 2 thoughts on that. In fact, a double thought. On one hand, I believe sometimes have to consider to build less for eternity, less for a long time. On the other hand, and then I come to a point that an older Flemish bouwmeester made, Bob Farrell, to say, build interesting ruins. An interesting ruin can continue. So I think there's also in our idea how we build, we yet had to integrate the thought of the next step, and that can be orientated in 2 directions, in my opinion. We once did a gallery, I think 15, 20 years ago, with almost no budget, but we made it also with the idea that once it could stop, it could be a house again, it could be, and 1 year ago, it is transformed again to a house. I'm incredibly happy that we made it in a kind of technique that it was also simple to transform it. Instead of spending a lot of budget, a lot of especially material, to build it and then to say, okay, now it has to change, and we throw away all this material.
I'm very conscious that it's now 4:20, and I'd just like to say that it's been my great honor and pleasure to be on a podium with these terrific architects, and I would invite you to spend a lot of time in their respective exhibitions and to absorb the work that they have done, and that it inspires us all. So I thank them for making the journey here, and it's been a pleasure to listen to them speak. Thank you.